usually is known as one of our feature writers for our Sunday edition. She tracks stories which probably junior reporters like me cannot approach. She looks at a story with 360 degrees. She goes and talks to people who are not reported about or not written about. But one of her best work, and I truly believe that it's one of the most important work for our times right now, is that I cannot quote governments right now, but we live at a time where the people who are accused for terror attacks are in jails across the country. And there's a very important case that our newspaper has been tracking for nearly a decade now. And right now, with the change of regime, it's a little bit difficult for everyone here now, because the new government believes, through the judiciary, through its other agencies, that the people who are being accused as terrorists in a series of attacks, which are mostly right-wing, they are not the culprits, and even though there are a lot of evidences and everything in place. Sunanda wrote a beautiful story, and a very important story, where she interviewed the public prosecutor for the case, who actually came on record and said that they were under pressure, tremendous pressure from the government and from, let's say, the people who matter, to take back all the evidences which were available on the case. And it actually made a big impact. It also had a cascading effect on some 7 or other 8 terror attacks which happened and which investigation are still on. She's always dressed like this in a sari. She wears some of the most prettiest saris that I've seen. It's very tough to believe that she can actually expose a lot of investigative stuff, which she has over the last 7 years, in the way she interviews people and in the way she kind of brings out a lot of color and texture to communities and subjects that really matter. Sunanda.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here on a hot Sunday morning. I was thinking, Subha, I don't know how you get people to come to get up and come here to the museum on Sunday to hear a talk, but apparently he manages. So the topic I chose was the art of journalism, and I went to Google and I said, well, how credible is the Indian media? Because that was the topic, the art of journalism, credibility versus chaos that you see today. So when I said how credible is the Indian media, these were some of the responses that sprung up immediately on the net. The Indian media is as credible as Vijay Mallya, and that's not just because it's Goa that I've put this, but that was the first thing which came. Indian media was rather right about Maggie than Manipur. I think Indian media does not serve the people news, but advertisements of politicians, wealthy, influential people, because the cream of the nation is busy pursuing engineering and medical instead of taking up a career in media. That may have something to do with our salaries, but that's another topic. And the last, which hurt the most, was that the only reliable source of news is Doordarshan and Lok Sabha TV. And since Mehta just talked about and touched upon government control, this should know why it hurts a journalist so much. So I started thinking, when I entered journalism some 27 years ago, I remember distinctly my parents saying, no, do not do journalism. In fact, I didn't. When I got admission in a very premier journalism school, and I also got admission in B.Ed. So they pushed me to do B.Ed because they thought journalism was, a very tough job. It was, at that time, the girls would go out to the interiors with teams of reporters to, places where few people go. You come home late at the night, and I think they're also worried how much I would be paid as a journalist, and they were probably more worried I would end up marrying a journalist and spend so much life counting notes. So they said, no, don't do journalism, and I didn't, but I did, and then I came back. So amongst all the things that they told me, the one thing they did not tell me, that don't do journalism because it's not a credible profession. It is not something that suffers from lack of credibility. In fact, if anything, they thought that journalism was a highly respected profession, but it has lots of dangers involved, which probably at that age my parents were not quite ready to go ahead with it. And that's me thinking that what is it that journalism was when I entered that time, the field? What was it like? What were the catchwords? The biggest catchword I thought associated with journalism was freedom. We all talked of freedom of the press. That is the thing which kind of, which upset us the most, which was most debatable, because that was the brazen attitude towards press by the governments which were there. And it started right from the beginning. 1780, the first Hickey's Bengal Gazette, he had to face a lot of problems. The paper was closed down for a few months. Newsprint was denied because he was writing against the government. Then there were others, Calcutta Gazette, Bengal Journal, which I've just put it a little bit of the history of the newspaper which started in India. But right from 1780s onwards, we had been battling the whole question of freedom of the press, because freedom of the press was so closely associated with patriotism. You know, it was a vehicle for information. It was a tool for freedom struggle. Gandhi himself used to write. Vajpayee was a journalist. So everywhere there was the freedom struggle and the freedom of the press, they went hand in hand. And which is why the government's focus and direction was always to muzzle the press. They tried every means possible to make sure that the press does not get a free hand. It was unheard of that the press would become a mouthpiece of the government or anyone else, be it commercial interests, be it corporates, be it people with power. It just didn't happen. Similarly, when emergency was declared in 1975, and it was complete clampdown on the press, the other day I was reading a very interesting book by Tavleen Singh, Darbar, in which she describes when she has just entered the profession and emergency was declared. Every newsroom was buzzing about what would happen to the press, because that was the first thing that the government would try to cow down. For Express, we have a very senior journalist called Kumi Kapoor. She has written a book on Ramnath Goenka, and she's described in detail what happened that time, how there was a message sent by the finance minister at that time, C. Subramaniam, and he thought that Indian Express, which at that time had a circulation of 50 lakh, should be sold to the Congress party or their minions. And Ramnath Goenka refused. So what followed was a lot of strong arm tactics which followed. The press, the newsprint was cancelled. Government and public advertisements were cancelled. Private people were pressurized not to give ad to the paper. There was a huge amount of financial crunch. Salaries were not paid. But the struggle continued. And finally, the editor that time, Kuldeep Nayyar, he had this scoop that how in March 77 the general elections will be held and all the emergency regulations would be relaxed. So after that, immediately, Guru Murthy, who was one of our finest writers, there was a series of stories written about the exact situation which prevailed in the country during emergency, rather than what almost every other paper in the country was writing, which was just handouts given by the government. So these were the ways we worked, and this was what I think just fueled every journalist's dream. This is why you join the whole profession. But somewhere along the way, obviously things have gone wrong, because today no one talks of freedom of the press. That word freedom of the press, freedom and press, is really not talked about together. The only other time I heard it was a few days ago. I was listening to an interview by Martina Navratilova, and she was talking about how at her time everyone talked of freedom of press during her heydays, and all she wanted was freedom from the press. So which was not exactly very complimentary, but I realized that there is a change. And the change was that from freedom of the press, we started discussing credibility of the press, accountability of the press. It's a sad day when the fourth estate, which has to hold everyone accountable in this country, is being asked to give accountability. So what is the reason? Well, one prime reason is that, for a long time we were just print media, the newspapers. And print media and the traditional form of journalism has had its foundations are very deep. There's certain ethics, there's certain training that was followed to the hilt. And then there was an explosion of media, which is perfectly right. It was a very, very welcome move. But that is when things started going a little out of hand. So today, we have 99 million newspapers copies which are sold. This is the second largest newspaper market in the world. Broadband users, 11th largest in the world. 4th largest television broadcast station. 1,400 stations, out of which 400 are news channels. We have about 250 FM radios. And now the news which is coming to the people is coming through your televisions, through the iPad, through the internet, through the mobile phone, which has probably become the biggest disseminator of news. From 5 million mobiles 25 years ago, 900 million mobiles today and counting. So, well, none of us are complaining about the advances made technologically as far as news goes. I mean, this would be saying like, we are very upset that the stone tablets have been replaced by newspapers. You have to move ahead. You have to give convenience to people. News has to come to you directly, which is what these online tools have enabled. But there is a lot of fallouts of how the primary source of news stopped being the newspaper and the television, and it fell open to the social media to give this news. When the television channels came, there was chaos, but it was chaos with a cause. It was a very welcome move because you had these private channels who, for the first time, they challenged the monopoly of Doordarshan, which was basically a government-owned television. All of those who belong to my time know we just watched Krishi Darshan for the longest time of our childhood. When we were there used to be one movie, a little bit of cinema, and a whole lot of educational program, and basically what the government wanted you to see, hear, and believe. So 95, I think, was when private television came. And I was reading this article by Pranoy Roy, who started NDTV, and he said it was so much excitement. They threw out the proposition for funding. They didn't want government funding. And they got private funding. Ratan Tata, I think, set them up for 3 years, and with all the independence that they needed. So Pranay writes that in his whole excitement, on the day they were to give the news, he went on air and said, for the first time in the history of the country, we will bring you live news. And that was it. There were trembles through the government corridors because the word live news was never accepted or even acknowledged. In fact, live was a 4-lettered word, which of course it was, for the government. Immediately there were calls and said, you are not allowed to give live news. There is a rule against it. So the whole NDTV team apparently sat and they thought it out. So then they worked around. They got a hard disk with very large capacity, and they would record the news at 10 to 8 and keep it for 10 minutes in front of their eyes physically in that disk, and then start showing it at 8. So that technically it was not live news. The government was happy, and for the first time, Indian news got a bit of freedom that they needed. So they came with a lot of promise. There were scams which were exposed. Politicians who would only be seen about, once or twice in a year, and definitely only during the time of elections. They were brought out by the 24 hours camera which was on them. There was scrutiny, there was scanners, there was accountability. The fear of exposures made the politicians deliver on their promises. In fact, someone said how they even changed the way they spoke. So they would come on Doordarshan and spend about 45 minutes trying to make a point. And today we know on news channels, if you don't make your point in about 35 seconds, you'll be shouted out by the anchor. So they actually became smarter in the way they talk to the public. And new age journalists appeared who would handle everything. They would handle reporting, they would handle the camera, they would handle an iPad, and journalism became a very energetic, a very interesting form of media. Why journalism is so important to a democracy other than being just the fourth pillar, and how it affects democracy is also one thing I wanted to show. From 1947 to 77, 80% of the governments were voted back to power. This was also the time when journalism was in its docile, phase. It was just coming out, so there was a lot of compromise, there was a lot of listening to what the government says, so it was a very non-aggressive media. 77 to 2007, 60% of governments were thrown out. This was the aggressive media which was coming into its own. Last 10 years, 2007 to 17, half voted, half back, just like the media, from discerning to informative to confused. So which is just to show that the state of the media really reflects on the state of the Indian politics. Today, from launching a war against corruption, against government, we are actually fighting a war within ourselves. It's a battleground of the media. It is survival of the quickest. We all know that. Seconds matter. It's the triumph of the TRP. There is Twitter versus truth. There is Facebook versus facts. There is WhatsApp versus the basic cardinal grounds of journalism, what, when, how, where and why. And there is trolling, which completely eclipses genuine reaction to whatever you write. And there are lots more which I very frankly don't know, given the fact that I belong to an age when you wanted something to happen, you prayed to God, now we just Google. But I think one of the most damning things which has happened is this thing called TRP. This is how channels, it's decided which are the most watched channels. This television rating points. I don't know whether how many of you know there are certain professions that exist which are called ratings consultant. That's what the only name they have. And there's a thing called people's meter. So how do we know? Really, how do we know who is watching the channel the most in individual households? Does anyone here know how TRPs are obtained? TRPs? Anyone? I mean, you all know what TRP is, right? So do any of you have thought, how is this TRP figure obtained? So you see what happens is, there are things called people's meter. These meters are installed in television sets in all cities across the country. They are supposed to be very, very secretive. But of course, we live in a country where, this actually now is the worst kept secret. But it's very easy to reach this point. So people know. So the rating consultants know where are the people meters. So they just go to those homes and they carry with them a 60-inch flat screen plasma TV, which they give to the family. I'm not saying all channels do this, not at all, but there are many who do too. So this TV is given and they're told, you watch whatever you want in this fantastic flat screen TV that we have for you. And this TV where the people's meter is installed, please watch only what we tell you to. So these are how TRP and ratings are obtained very often, which is why I'm telling you all this is because this is one of the reasons why the credibility of journalism is now being talked about. Because people are getting to know how TRPs are obtained. They know how figures are completely managed. The other day, another very well-known journalist, Rajdeep Sardesai, he was in Pune, where I am from. And he was talking about similar things which are happening to the media. And he was saying how he was so pained that when a singer of the stature of Kishori Amankar, she died, they were not able to run many programs on her. Not just them, most channels did not run in-depth, long tributes and special programs on her, other than the government channels, simply because they were told that this will not get us TRPs. What probably would give better TRPs are, okay, maybe news stories like, the ban on the bullfighting. These are stories which will interest people, but Kishori Amankar doesn't. So this is one of the states we have come to. I remember when I was, I think this was about 7-8 years ago in Pune, maybe more. I was working with Indian Express only as a journalist. And there's a very close family friend whose wife was a well-known lawyer, and she was going through a very bad marriage. I mean, the man was torturing her, absolutely, and she had decided to walk out. She had walked out, but still he was blackmailing her for a variety of reasons. And while it was going on, I remember switching on a channel famous for sensationalizing the news, which is again the bane of the media these days. And the headline said, "Vakil ne pati ko marne ke liye supari di." For all of you, I'll translate. It said that this lawyer has given money, blood money, to someone to have her husband killed. And her photograph was there on the paper. I was shocked for 2 minutes, and I immediately called. And that girl was in such a bad state. In fact, she was almost contemplating suicide with this going on. And because I knew the family for 30 years, I knew the inside story. But the basic thing of but that man had obviously managed to have this planted on the television without the basic, which is one of our basic trainings given to journalists. You go to the other side and get the other side of the story. And this was not done. And it was not done because it was much more catchy to say this lawyer has given blood money and she wants her husband eliminated. The impact that had on the family and the girl, it lasted years. When I also go and teach in the university, I always tell my students that when it comes out in black and white and now also in the colorful screens, it is accepted as the cardinal truth. please remember, people will believe what you show. So when you write, it is the biggest responsibility you have. You have to write the truth, but more than anything else, please, you have to write with sensitivity. Because for you, it's just one story. For the person involved, it could mean that, it could make or mar the person's life. But we, as I said, live in times now where news has been drowned out by a lot of noise. I mean, we all watch our channels, we watch about the news channels. You have those panels who are shouting, the panelists are shouting, the anchor is shouting louder than the panelists. Everyone is into a slang match. There is breaking news, which could, there was someone who wrote a fantastic piece on how a minister gets up and he brushes his teeth, and that's the breaking news which is being shown. There is trial by media. We all know what happened, from the Sheena Bora case to the Sunanda Pushkar case. Sunanda Pushkar case is one of the, unusual ones. She was actually a very close friend of mine. She was my schoolmate. And I wrote a big piece after she died. We were together for many years. But the fact is, it's one of the rare cases where the husband, we all don't know whether he's involved or not involved. The only people who seem to know is the media, which has already said that he's involved. I mean, they have kind of hung him without a shred of evidence being there. So this very, very vital raw material we are supposed to work on, evidence, has somehow been, just pushed into the background when this whole hurry to come up with the news, hurry to come up with a new angle, hurry to say something which immediately gets the eyeballs and puts you one up on the next channel. There's a lot of trivialization of news. There is dumbing down of news because ratings mean more advertisement, and advertisement means more money, and that means survival. I have this thing which I call a kind of a schizophrenic news screen, because that's the only way I could find to describe it. You have this news screen where there's the main news going on, maybe the election news, which you're all watching. And suddenly on one side, there is this woman turning into a snake, or a snake turning into a woman. And then on the side it comes, Sonu Nigam has shaved off his head. And then there is the stock market which is going up and down. And then you have a little bit, on the next program, and a bit of the weather. So it is, I really think the screen suffering from a multiple personality disorder. You really don't know what you're trying to tell the viewer. Probably the only thing is that you're trying to cater to every person's interest in the room, because you want to tell the person, and we are told that all the time, don't go away. Stay on the channel. You don't want anyone to change the channels. So in this whole enthusiasm to catch the attention on every person, there are these multitudes of news unrelated to each other on one screen, which is coming up time and again. In fact, I think they're counterproductive. I get so confused, not being as talented as the person who's made the screen. I can't follow, or I don't know what to follow, and I have to switch, and I would go back and I watch some music channel, which at least, is blaring only one number. Moving on from online, from television, another big source of news these days is WhatsApp, which is adding to the whole chaos that the media industry is into. Almost every day I get a WhatsApp, there's some images, there is some loud message like this: paid media will never show all this. This came during the Kashmir incident of stone pelting. There were these pictures of policemen who have got hurt and they're bleeding, and it said, paid media will never show this. Please forward maximum so world know what's happening. And then again, whoever forwarded it right, is this true? It gives me a strange satisfaction that at least someone still thinks that someone from the print media has to endorse and say whether it's true or not true for people to believe. That's the only hope I hold on to. But from everything, media ownerships, which anchor is marrying which politician, all these WhatsApp messages are daily on the phone. Every day I have to answer, which is not part of my job. Tell people who don't probably even read my paper whether this is true or not. In fact, as an aside, I wanted to say, I remember when the elections were going on, I actually started avoiding going out to get-togethers. Because the minute I would sit down with friends or people for a dinner, someone would come and sit next to me and say, so who's going to win in UP? So being a print media journalist who usually normally says the truth, I would say the truth, which is that I don't know. But that was never accepted. Come on, I'm sure you've done your calculations. You know who's going to win. Why aren't you telling? It just would not convince them. But I could say this. I feel the other media, the WhatsApp, your Facebook, the Twitter, they have a kind of an ego problem with that, an ego issue. They will not say that they don't know. They know it. Of course they know it. So immediately after the elections finished, we had this flurry of exit polls all on our WhatsApp, saying which party is getting how many seats and saying they're getting it. This is not even a prediction. They are going to get it. Then we have Twitter, which again has a great feature. I mean, we follow Twitter. They are the ministers who tweet all the time, and they keep us on our toes because you never know. It's so unpredictable what they will tweet. But the problem happens when everyone thinks this is the source for news. This is what news is. And you have a whole lot of people out there, who play judge, jury, executioner in all 140 characters. It's done. The deal is signed on Twitter. So this Twitter is now being seen a lot as a primary newsroom, which is what is worrying, because we as editors are also told to follow what's happening on Twitter. Because many times that's what people are talking about. And I have been told a lot of channels are supposed to put these provocative hashtags so that people follow them, so that Twitter follows them, and they have more, people, that's what the news of the day, so then they can run their own stories. But what is happening is that, what is it that is trending on Twitter? We need to find out what is it. Do dowry deaths trend on Twitter? No. Do child marriages trend, do they trend on Twitter? They don't. What trends on Twitter, unfortunately, is if Kareena Kapoor decides she's going to name her child Taimur, that really trends. Or even whatever which is sensational, which requires you to give immediate opinions, that is what is trending the most. And that is the jeopardy in following Twitter news. And the main thing which actually is, why all of these are so scary is because there's no one regulating. There is, at least for the press, the print, we have the Press Council of India, which is regulating. Even for television now, especially after 26/11, there have been regulations in place. We people know what line to cross and what not to cross. Unfortunately, with the new media in, which is Twitter, which is WhatsApp, which is Facebook, the Instagram, and a whole lot of others, there are still no regulations. No one is regulating. And it's a free-for-all. Believe what you want to, don't believe what you don't want to. It's perfectly okay, because as it is in 10 minutes, the story will change. There was this extremely nice article in Guardian, Australian Guardian, which talked about the journalism, the crisis which is facing journalism worldwide. And the biggest thing is with this www. Almost anyone can use that now. Any big company, media outlet, anyone can start using www, World Wide Web, and they can become the media. Any big enterprise outfit can become a media organization. And there is no knowing what they're putting, whether it's news, whether it's journalism, or it's completely PR stuff, which very often happens. And the main reason is, well, the economics work very well when you're putting things online, rather than you're cutting down a tree, making a paper, having a newsprint, having that thrown over fences. These things cost money. Coming online costs very little. I now want to talk about something called the Heisenberg Principle. So I'm coming now closely to what has really affected the media. Heisenberg Principle is that as you get close to any object or target, it changes its nature and essence. In media, we all talk about the Heisenberg Principle in journalism, that the closer you move to the sole objective of profit, the more the nature of journalism changes. And this is precisely what has happened. Corporates, big money, enter media, fearless journalism, objective journalism has been compromised, which is why the whole issue of credibility of journalists and journalism is now being debated. Corporate versus conscience. How many people read things on when the big, really, really big guys are, they are taken on by the media? Is getting lesser and lesser. At the expense of, because I worked 20 years in Express, so the only people I can really quote with authority is my own, not just because I'm working. But it takes you back to the time when government decisions were being, government policies were being tweaked to benefit only a particular business house. We all know that. It was, there's a movie also made on that, the entire issue, but all policies, all tenders, everything was coming out, so only one big business house benefits. No one would write, except the Indian Express. There were a series of stories which Gurumati then put together on pointing out this very, very blatant and completely biased policy by the government. No other paper did it. Again, there were raids at the office, there were clampdowns, but it was just carried on. In fact, later also when Express did a whole campaign on Bofors, Rajiv Gandhi time, he had banned Indian Express on all his flights. And it was, I think, one of our proudest moments that we are banned on those flights by a politician who was allegedly involved in that. But today there are very few people who will take on this. Closer home, well, we have the mining in Goa. When was the last time there was a big sustained campaign against mining? In fact, I was telling Smita last week, she wrote a wonderful piece on mining. And I was telling her, I'm so glad Express is here and you can take up this topic which not many touch, and we all know why. If you're in Goa, you all know why mining, which is really robbing Goa inside out, why there are no campaigns against it. But it'd be unfair for me to just rant about television and Twitter and WhatsApp. Even in the print media, the heat is being felt. The writing is on the wall because we have also felt the corporate money coming in. A lot of papers, there is a complete devaluation of the editor's office. They don't want an editor who can think, who can assign bravely and without any other constraint articles to do. They want people who will toe the line. They want people who would, agree to the general idea of a newspaper. One of the biggest papers in the country, the owner has gone on record saying that when your revenue comes from advertisement, when 80% of your revenue comes from advertisement, you are in the business of advertising, you're not in the business of news. So most papers today are headed and led by marketing and advertisers. There are very few newspapers actually, and Express is one of them, where it's editorially driven, where the decision is taken by the editor. Well, I used to always think that, I don't know. I mean, these things probably happen at a much higher scale than me. The bosses decide, so maybe there are compromises made. But now for the last 6.5 years, I have been at the helm of one edition. And I know in 6.5 years, no one has told me, do not print this because it affects your commercial interest. We have lost full-page ads. There is this huge hill station coming up near Pune where all the environment norms have been violated. No paper rights, only Express rights. And we lose out all the ads. We don't get increments because when the appraisals obviously have to suffer, but we're okay with that. There are educational institutions. There is one which had this MBA. They started this 2-year full-fledged MBA. And when the students came, they were told, oh, no, sorry, this is not full-time. This is actually, a correspondence MBA, which is a huge difference. The students have come from rural areas, and they had sold their homes, they sold their shops. Their parents had taken hard loans and sent them for the 2-year MBA because the institute has such a big name. It was hugely known in the country. And they came to our office with the letters saying that this is a 2-year full-time MBA. And when we had the evidence, we wrote about it. They were very, very big advertisers. Again, full-page ads, which, pays salaries for an entire office. And the corporate office of that institute, they wrote a letter to my editor-in-chief in Delhi saying, this is the apology we want. I mean, they had the gall to actually write the apology and say, these are the wordings we want tomorrow in the newspaper. And with the subtle hint that if it doesn't come, you can think that the ads are not coming. So my editor sent me the letter and said, do you think we should carry this? I said, certainly not, because we should not carry any form of apology because we have the evidence. Immediately, they were told in very polite language what they should actually do with the apology, and we did not publish it. We lost the ads, but the goodwill which came to the paper in a city like Pune, which is a student city, holds us together even now. And that is really what matters finally in journalism. You have biased news, you have paid news. Then there is fake news where people have to just click and the click gets more business money. Then there are advertorials. Now, paid news and advertorials especially are okay to an extent, as long as you are telling your readers this is paid news. The whole idea of advertorial is that you write something about someone in the editorial space, but you tell the reader, this is advertisement. We have been paid to write this. So the reader is not misled into thinking that you are telling the reader that this is great stuff. The person has paid for you to tell the reader this is great stuff. But unfortunately, you will find in very many, I mean, all of you read a lot of magazines. You have In Focus, Spotlight. So these are editorials. And a lot of places it is told very clearly. In Express is told a bit too clearly. We put it on page 1 and we say, these pages should be read as advertisements. And they are by the marketing solution teams of the Indian Express. Very clearly it's paid for. But when this is not told, that is where the whole journalism becomes murky. When you are trying to merge editorial space with advertising space, that is really hitting at the foundation of journalism. Today journalists have even more tough because, Smita just told you, we live in times when governments believe they should be having a lot of control. So it's not that journalists have just corporate control, there is also a lot of government control for the media. Well, all governments like to have a degree of control. When we had the emergency, there was different government. We have a different government now. But never has the media space shrunk so much as it's shrinking now. When you have ministers also going out, a lot of, there used to be a whole posse of journalists going. Today, they're only the official media, which normally goes with a lot of ministers and important people who go abroad, because so that what comes back to the country is only what is sent through official means. Of course, every paper worth its salt now spends the money and makes sure we have our own people there so that the right news is reported. Trolling, it is almost like a side government activity. There's also a book, Swati, an ex-journalist, written, I'm a Troll. Some of you should read it. It really throws light on how they are paid to troll anything which is anti-government. I mean, I wrote a very mildly, which is of course not Sally, another mildly anti-government edit, and it was more to do with cinema. And if I had not known that there are trolls who write this stuff, I may have even, looked for a different profession, because it cut me down to little bits. And that happens to all of us. Unfortunately, we all know now how trolls work, so the impact is much less. So what do you do? Now we're in this entire scenario where journalism is being questioned. So how do you do? What will actually sustain? Frankly, there's only one thing left to do, to go back to the basics of journalism, which is what has been lost in this whole hyperactivity which is governing the media. Journalism, I had gone to some type of a fellowship, and I was at the Guardian, and every week they have someone who comes and talks to the journalists. So that time there was one of the internet gurus, and he was also a journalist who had come to talk to the entire staff there, and I happened to be there, fortunately. And he was the one who predicts trends of what will happen in different fields. And he said in journalism, finally, only that journalism will sustain which makes a difference, which is community journalism, which improves life, and of course, which is free, fair, and frank. Today, when I look back at my own 27 years in journalism, I try to see what were the high points. The high points were nothing what a lot of people think. There have been a lot of grand occasions. You are privy to a lot of news. You are privy to a lot of invitations where people want you to come. There's so-called power associated with the pen that you have in your hand. There are contacts you have. But frankly, when you look back, nothing of this matters. To me, I would say what matters are the stories which I've done, which have made a difference. This little Sullivan story, it shook up the government. It was a deeply satisfying experience as a journalist. There was once a story we had done. There was this girl in FTII in Pune, Neetu Singh. She was doing an editing course. And we got the news that overnight the police had picked her up and they had sent her back to Nepal. She was from Nepal. And we got the news from some channels. So me and another reporter, the crime reporter, we split. He went to the police and I went to FTII. And he came back earlier from the police because they had a version ready. And they said, she was a spy. She was from Nepal. She was a spy. It fits in so beautifully. So he came and wrote the story. She was a spy. And so overnight, she was just transported back to Nepal. When I went to FTI, it was found out she was in Nepal, married to a very powerful politician. And the marriage had soured. She had run away from there and come to do the editing course over here. And because he wanted her back, he used his connections as a powerful politician between the governments and got, fed stories, and the government told the police, and the police picked her up and sent her back. And that was actual story. We then had the facts of the girl, and she was in Nepal under house arrest. So then, of course, we changed the story, and this came out on page 1, all editions were Express. There was a huge hue and cry. Governments got into contact with each other. There were dialogues. We got a fax from her, how she's under house arrest. Her parents, who till now also believe the man who had said she'd run away and I was such a nice person, and still who was supporting the son-in-law, also realized that the daughter, they didn't even know she's back in Nepal. And it so happened that finally he was compelled to let her go. She came back to FTI. She completed her studies. Today she is one of the good editors in Bollywood. She often calls and she tells us, you know, when I think of the angels in my life, I start with your paper. You know, this is what sustains. This is what you do as a journalist. And finally, this is the only thing which actually make a difference. Self-regulated journalism. We talk of regulations. That's again a very popular thing, but that's something the government loves. You know, talk of regulation, they get all excited. But it has to be self-regulation. Journalists should know where to draw the line, which is when we talk of sensitivity. You have the thing, the news is there in front of you. As a journalist, your sensitivity, what does your instinct tell you? That will make a difference. And that will all automatically come down to credibility. How to do it? Go back to basics. In my office, we all now say, go back to basics, keep the phone down, go out there and do the story in the field. One of the things which has hampered journalism are all these convenient tools we have. We make a call, we write an email, we do a WhatsApp, we get pictures on the WhatsApp. There is even a riot going on. We have someone who lives near us, just go and take pictures and send it to us. So it's become a little convenient, which we need to now eliminate, get back to foot. Again, one small example, David Headley had come to Pune. In fact, he had kind of sneaked his way into Pune, and he went to the Osho commune, he went everywhere, and our rival paper, to our extreme embarrassment, had the story of David Headley in Pune. So of course, I was not there at that time, so I was also with others hauled up and given a dressing down and said, now you all go and get a better story than what the paper has. We had no option but to do footwork. Go out in the sun, we went. And it was luck. I took an auto rickshaw and I said, okay, wherever foreigners stay in Pune, take me to the hotels. And I started going to the hotels. People were doing all kind of stuff, and we all were trying. And I went to the hotel, and I would just barge my way and say, show us the guest register. Some showed, some didn't, Some were smarter than us, and they said, it's not allowed, and we had to pull back. And some said, by the time they were like deciding whether it's right or wrong, we would see the register. And I went into one, which was the Sunbeam, I think the hotel in Koregaon Park, and my good luck, there was a trainee there at the register, and I said, show the register. And he said, but we can't show. I said, of course, the press, you have to show the press, that's the rule. So he said, oh, really? And so he showed me the register, and there was David Headley who had checked into the hotel, the timing, the days, the room. It was a great scoop. I mean, the police also didn't know where he was staying. So I took the register, I got it, photo started, which again, no manager would have allowed. But we went on, I called the cameraman, he took pictures. So the trainee thought, oh my God, my hotel is being photographed. Poor guy, I never went back to find out what happened later to him. And we had David Headley with his signature, we had printed it next in the paper. But again, it wouldn't have happened if we had not been sent out almost forcibly, and we did that. And that is what today journalists need to go out, do the footwork. Nothing counts more than that. They need to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. They need to tell both sides of the story. Be objective, investigative, independent journalism and responsible journalism. And the thing is that it is actually happening. We've had a lot of very good exposures. Adarsh was a big exposure which really shook up the government. The Panama Papers, that has such an impact, 3,000 journalists working across the globe. What is also heartening is this time's Pulitzer Prize, which went to a newspaper for editorial writing. It is a small family-run paper in the US with a circulation of 3,000. And they have got the Pulitzer because they carried out a sustained, tenacious campaign against agricultural corporatization in their own little city. And it is the highest award of journalism today. So, which is also a way of telling that this is what is being recognized. People have realized that that there is a difference between journalism which takes time, which takes effort, and quick fit 2-minute journalism which is happening. Like again I said, technology is welcome, but you have to use technology to the best and not to the worst. Okay, finally, some good news. every time I'm asked, every time someone comes and talks to me, the one question I always ask is, why does the newspaper only publish bad news? I was thinking someone's going to get up and say, why are you only talking about bad news? But I always tell them, well, be thankful we are in times when bad news makes news. Imagine living in a time when only some good news made news, which would mean that good news is the aberration. Be happy that bad news and bad happenings are still the aberration. You know, the world is now slowly moving towards appreciating quality journalism, and that is happening because I know of a lot of online attempts which are made, which promises quality journalism and original research journalism, and they've got fantastic funding which is happening. China, which actually China is notorious for clamping down on media. You really shouldn't talk of China and talk of good news for media. There's no Facebook, there's no Google, I think. They've banned all of this. But they have a thing called WeChat. You know, like they say, but finally they caught up late, but now they're overtaking the world with this WeChat, which is a better version, like WhatsApp and all look like kindergarten stuff in front of them. And there, they are hiring journalists, freelancers at huge salaries because the brief is, we want quality journalism, we want the truth, we want objective journalism. There is a downside. WeChat also is a cashless pay system. So all the information, you thought if Google had information, one should go to WeChat. They would probably know what you're having for breakfast. It is so well the surveillance. But that's a side story. But everything good that can happen with journalism online is happening there. Public funded media is getting very popular. There's crowdfunding. You know, when you are funded by the public, you don't depend on either the government or the corporates or on advertisements. And that is a sure shot way to free yourself from doing what you want to. Citizen journalism, again, that's a way forward. It cannot replace journalists. You know, one of our ex-editors always say that when you don't have citizen lawyers, you don't have citizen doctors, how can you have citizen journalists? But it is there, and it could, with a bit of hand-holding, it is there to stay. That can be a very good source also of reliable journalism. So that's what we are doing. We are making this whole journey. We have done it from credibility to chaos. And now slowly, the good news is that finally we are coming back to journalism, which is more of courage. And very important, the word I would use, which goes above courage, is conscience. Journalism of conscience is what I feel is going to sustain and be the future. There was this famous quote, again by a founder, who said, you know, when we were fighting all the government, the way they clamped down, all the restrictions. So it says that, you know, when we can continue the fight, because finally in the end, there are two things. You can either listen to the dictates of your purse, or you can listen to the dictates of your heart. Here we have always listened to the dictates of our heart, with the reason all of us, you know, when the organization we work. But that is for every journalist across. The minute a journalist starts listening to the conscience, you will know what is right to write. And that is finally will make for good journalism, will make for maybe another 10 years. We will not discuss credibility of journalism. We will once again be discussing the credible stories, the great work that journalists have done, and helpfully, and done with the help of this technology, merged it together to, you know, bring it out to a lot of people. So that's a hope I end this with. We said art of journalism. Well, I just hope the canvas of journalism is much more promising in the coming years. Thank you.